One of the most important aspects of any brain injury case is explaining to a jury how the brain is injured in an accident. In order to do this, I need to show a model of the brain to the jury and first explain something about the physical makeup of the brain itself. The brain is a very soft and delicate structure, sort of like the mushy consistency of jello or oatmeal. It's easily subject to being bruised or injured. Further, each layer of the brain has a different consistency or density, so that when the brain moves, each layer moves at a different rate of speed, sort of like the difference between throwing a wiffle ball and a hardball. They are both the same size and the same shape, but each moves at a different rate of speed. Like the yolk of an egg, the brain is damaged by shaking. And while frequently the inside or the yolk is damaged and the outside remains undamaged, so too in the brain, the shaking of the brain within the skull may cause considerable damage to the brain, but no damage to the skull itself. The brain sits in the skull. While people think that the skull provides a lot of protection to the brain, which in some respects it does, it also provides a source of damage to the brain because of the sharp inside edges and sharp ridges and protrusions which can easily be seen and felt. So the brain sits in the skull surrounded by fluid, known as cerebrospinal fluid, which acts as a shock absorber in normal day-to-day movements. However, when there's an accident, the individual's head rapidly moves forward or backwards or is twisted inside the skull, and the brain also moves within the skull, and that's when the damage to the brain tissue takes place. The movement of the brain within the skull causes injury to teeny microscopic nerve fibers. As a result of the movement of the brain within the skull, the brain brushes up against these sharp ridges and protrusions that we have discussed, causing the brain to become bruised and causing the nerve fibers to be disrupted, to become torn, and even to die. Not all brain injury takes place at the point of impact, and we have to learn something about two French terms known as coup and contra coup. These terms help to explain that sometimes the injury to the brain occurs at the site of impact. This is known as a coup injury, and at other times injury takes place on the opposite side of the brain, which is known as a contra coup injury. It really all depends what's moving, the brain or the object that strikes the brain. For instance, if you fall and you strike your head on the sidewalk, the point of impact is the coup injury, and the other side of the brain, after it falls forward and backward, is known as the contra coup injury. When it's the brain that's moving and hitting a fixed solid object, such as the ground or the dashboard of the car, you get a small coup injury and a bigger contra coup injury. But if it is a moving object that strikes the skull, which is stationary, like a baseball bat which hits a player standing still, you will get a bigger injury at the site of impact called the coup injury and a smaller injury on the other side of the brain. The most vulnerable portions of the brain to injury within the skull are here where the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes sit. The frontal lobes and the temporal lobes are responsible for our emotions, our executive functioning, our ability to shift focus between different tasks, our memory, our concentration, and our personality. These are the lobes that are most often affected by the movement of the brain within the skull. Other damage to the brain takes place as a result of chemical changes within the brain. As the nerve fibers of brain cells stretch and break, they set off chemical reactions that slowly take place over time. These chemical changes often damage and kill nerve cells, causing more damage to take place. There are also other structures deep within the brain that are very vulnerable to injury as a result of the brain's movement within the skull. One of these structures is known as the corpus callosum region of the brain, which is the switching station between the right side of the brain and the left side. While some of these injuries may show up on CAT scans or MRI studies, frequently the injuries are so microscopic that they simply can't show up. But this doesn't mean that the injury didn't take place. It only means that the testing equipment that we have is not sensitive enough to pick up the microscopic structural damage that has taken place. In experiments in monkeys and in looking at autopsies of the injured brain, we are able to document this damage to the brain tissue and determine how it took place. A brain injury attorney needs to know how to explain the mechanism of brain injury and brain damage to a jury to properly represent his or her client. If you need a brain injury lawyer, you can call me, Michael Kaplan, toll-free at 1-866-BRAIN-LAW, or email me at michael@brainlaw.com.